Welcome to Her Secret Truth, a place where the truth always comes out. Here you'll hear stories of family betrayals, hidden secrets, and shocking revelations. Every story is a step closer to the truth someone tried to hide. Subscribe to Her Secret Truth so you don't miss new stories you won't be able to stop watching. The champagne flute slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble floor as I stared in disbelief at my own brushstrokes being sold for $330,000. Lauren stood proudly beside the auctioneer, glowing in designer silk as she accepted congratulations for what everyone believed was her masterpiece, while I remained frozen in place, dressed in my server's uniform. For 16 years I had believed that painting was gone forever, destroyed during the basement flood that had taken everything else I owned. Yet there it was, hanging under the gallery lights. My signature had been carefully painted over and replaced with hers. My soul was being sold to strangers while my own daughter-in-law smiled, as if she had created something magical instead of pulling off the perfect crime. Before we continue, feel free to comment with your location and subscribe so you can stay connected. Now it is time to step into the story. Let me explain how I ended up serving champagne in the very gallery where my stolen dreams were being auctioned to the highest bidder. Sometimes life has a strange and twisted sense of humor, and sometimes that twist is exactly what forces you to find your courage again. 3 months earlier, I was simply Catherine Whitaker, a 68-year-old woman who had become nearly invisible to the world. The only people who seemed to notice me were bill collectors and grocery store clerks who barely lifted their eyes when I carefully counted out exact change. My husband Charles had been gone for 8 years, leaving behind a mortgage I struggled to afford and memories that could not pay the rent. My son Lucas visited only twice a year, usually bringing his wife Lauren with him. Their visits never lasted long, but they lasted long enough for me to feel their quiet disappointment in the choices I had made. During one visit, Lucas looked around my cluttered apartment and spoke with the kind of expression children sometimes wear when they believe their parents never fulfilled their potential. He explained that I could have become someone important if I had followed my talent. As he said it, he added that it was painful to see so much ability simply wasted. He was not wrong about the talent. There was a time when Catherine Whitaker had been known as Ellie Bennett, a young woman who painted landscapes so vivid that people said they could almost smell the wildflowers and feel the morning mist in the air. I had earned a scholarship to the Chicago Art Institute. A gallery had once shown interest in my work, and my dreams stretched far beyond the small Kansas town where I had grown up. Then Charles entered my life. Charles was kind, steady, and dependable, with an accounting degree and a very practical plan for the future. Life began to follow a sensible path. We married when I was 22 years old. Lucas was born when I was 24. Slowly, art became something I did only when I had spare time. The studio eventually turned into a guest room. My easel was moved out to the garage. Before long, the brushes and paints were packed into boxes labeled someday. After Charles died, I tried to find those boxes again. I tried to remember the person I used to be. But that hopeful someday had been buried beneath 8 long years of grief and financial struggle. 2 years ago, the basement flood seemed to erase what little remained of my artistic past. Canvases were ruined, brushes destroyed, and even the photographs of my old paintings disappeared. Or at least that was what I believed. When Lucas mentioned during one visit that Lauren had gotten a position at the prestigious Whitmore Gallery downtown, I felt a small flutter inside my chest that might have been pride. At least someone in the family was making something of themselves in the art world, even if it meant selling other people's dreams rather than creating them. Lucas spoke proudly about her success. He explained that Lauren was doing very well, and that she had an excellent eye for talent. He even mentioned that Catherine Langley believed Lauren had real potential as a future curator. I simply smiled and nodded, continuing to play the supportive mother-in-law role I had perfected over the years. What else could I have said? Admitting that watching someone else live the life I had once dreamed of made my chest feel like it was filled with broken glass would have accomplished nothing. So when Catherine Langley called me personally to offer a small job serving at gallery events, I was too surprised to refuse. She explained that Lauren had recommended me, and thought I might enjoy being around art again. Catherine spoke in a crisp and cultured voice while explaining that the job itself was quite simple. I would only be serving champagne and small appetizers during gallery openings and auctions. However, Lauren had mentioned that I once had an artistic background, and Catherine preferred staff members who appreciated the art displayed around them. The pay was reasonable, and the truth was that I needed the money. My Social Security barely covered rent, not to mention food and utilities. So I accepted the job. I bought a simple black dress that did not make me look like someone who had just stepped out of a discount store, and arrived for my first event 3 weeks ago. The Whitmore Gallery was exactly what I had once dreamed of in my younger years. White walls displayed carefully curated pieces under perfect lighting that made every painting glow. Quiet conversations filled the room as people discussed composition and brushwork with deep respect. Walking through those rooms carrying a tray of champagne made me feel like a ghost attending her own funeral. Lauren was polite but distant during my first few shifts. She acknowledged me with small nods while guiding wealthy collectors through the exhibitions. She looked completely at home in that environment, sophisticated, confident, and educated, speaking about art with effortless ease. Watching her move through the gallery felt like looking at the life I might have had if I had made different choices years ago. But tonight was different. Tonight was Lauren's first major auction as assistant curator, showcasing emerging contemporary artists. The centerpiece of the evening was a landscape painting that Catherine had described during the preview as absolutely stunning. I had been arranging champagne flutes for the arriving guests when I first saw it. The painting stood prominently in the main gallery, illuminated by its own spotlight. The blood rushed from my head so quickly that I had to grip the serving table to steady myself. It was my painting. Not something similar to what I might have created, not merely reminiscent of my style. It was the exact landscape I had painted of Miller's Creek in the summer of 2008. Every brushstroke exactly as I remembered it. The creek winding through tall grass, the old oak tree with its twisted branches, and the afternoon light filtering through leaves that I had spent weeks trying to perfect. But the signature in the lower right corner told a different story. It read A. Whitaker, written in Lauren's neat, careful script, layered directly over what I knew had once been M. Bennett. I stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself I was mistaken. Perhaps grief and age had twisted my memories. Perhaps I was imagining details that were not really there. Then my eyes landed on the one small imperfection that removed all doubt. Near the edge of the creek was a patch of color where the green looked slightly wrong. I had accidentally mixed too much blue into it and spent hours trying to correct the mistake. To everyone else it might appear like a tiny flaw, but to the artist who painted it, that spot represented an entire afternoon of frustration. There was no question anymore. It was my painting, my work, and it was about to be sold under Lauren's name. The auction began at 8 o'clock. I moved through the room serving champagne while forcing my hands to remain steady. Outwardly, I was nothing more than invisible Catherine Whitaker in a simple black dress. Inside, however, I felt like I was screaming. When the auctioneer finally announced Lot 17, introducing it as Lauren Whitaker's remarkable debut piece, I quietly positioned myself at the back of the room where I could see everything clearly. The opening bid began at $50,000. Hands rose across the room as the numbers climbed higher and higher. Each new bid echoed through the gallery, reminding me just how small my own minimum wage life had become. Lauren stood near the front of the room, her face glowing with carefully practiced modesty as guests congratulated her between bids. Around her neck she wore the pearl necklace I had given her for Christmas 2 years earlier, back when I could still afford gifts that meant something. 100,000. 150,000. 200,000. Lucas appeared beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The two of them watched the bidding with bright, hopeful expressions as if they were witnessing their future unfolding before them. Their future built on my stolen past. 300,000. 310,000. 330,000. The auctioneer raised his gavel and announced the final call. That was the moment the champagne flute slipped from my numb fingers. Crystal exploded against the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. Heads turned across the room, including Lauren's. For a brief and terrible moment, our eyes locked from opposite sides of the gallery. I saw something flash across her face. It was not guilt. It was not shame. It was recognition mixed with calculation, the expression of someone silently doing rapid calculations in their head. The auctioneer's voice cut through the room as he declared the sale complete, announcing that the remarkable piece by Lauren Whitaker had sold for $330,000. Applause filled the gallery. Meanwhile, I knelt on the floor gathering the scattered pieces of crystal, while my fingers trembled uncontrollably. A security guard stepped over with a small broom. His voice was polite but firm as he explained that accidents like this happened often during events, and suggested that I take a short break. I nodded silently and walked toward the staff room, leaving behind the applause, the laughter, and the sight of Lauren smiling while strangers congratulated her for selling my soul to the highest bidder. Inside the tiny break room, I sat on a folding chair and stared at my hands. I was 68 years old, and I had just watched my own daughter-in-law steal 16 years of my life in front of an entire room of people. The worst part was not even the money, although $330,000 was more than I could hope to earn in an entire decade of serving drinks. The worst part was how effortlessly she carried it all off. She accepted praise as though the painting truly belonged to her, as though she had spent those long mornings and late nights struggling to capture sunlight exactly the way it should fall across water and leaves. Yet as I sat there surrounded by stacks of gallery programs and empty champagne boxes, something began to rise in my chest that was not grief and was not shock. It was anger. A deep, sharp anger that tasted like copper and crackled through my body like electricity. Lauren Whitaker had made a very expensive mistake that evening. She had assumed that Catherine Whitaker, the quiet, broken woman wearing a server's uniform, was still the same as Ellie Bennett, the young artist who once believed in impossible dreams. It was time to remind her exactly who she had decided to steal from. I did not go home after the auction ended. Instead, I drove to the all-night diner on 5th Street and ordered a cup of black coffee that tasted bitter enough to match my thoughts. While I sat there, I tried to understand how a painting I had watched floodwater destroy 2 years earlier had somehow ended up hanging in Lauren's collection. The memory of that day remained painfully clear. I had been in the basement searching for Lucas's old baseball cards when the pipe burst. Water rushed everywhere, soaking through cardboard boxes and ruining everything stored there, including the wooden crate where I had kept my finished paintings, the ones that were too painful to display but too precious for me to throw away. Or at least that was what I believed at the time. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name of Dylan Hayes, the contractor who had handled the flood cleanup. Dylan had been Charles's bowling partner years ago, and he had given me a discounted price for the repair work. Perhaps he would remember something I had forgotten. He answered after the 4th ring, his voice heavy with sleep as he asked what time it was and why I was calling so late. I apologized for waking him and explained that I needed to ask about the basement cleanup he had done 2 years earlier. Dylan sounded tired and reminded me that it was already after midnight, wondering if the question could wait until morning. I asked him directly whether anything from those damaged boxes had been saved. He paused before answering. Then he explained that some items had been taken away. According to him, I had told them to throw everything out. During the cleanup, his nephew Ryan had been helping, and Ryan asked if he could keep some of the art supplies and paintings. Dylan said his nephew mentioned that his girlfriend enjoyed painting and might try restoring a few of the pieces. He reminded me that I had told them I did not care what happened to the damaged items. My heart started beating faster. Dylan had said his nephew's name was Ryan. Ryan Hayes. Lauren's maiden name was Hayes. I asked Dylan one more question, trying to keep my voice steady. I asked him to confirm his nephew's last name. He answered that it was Hayes and asked why that mattered. Then I asked one final question. I asked him if he remembered the name of Ryan's girlfriend. Dylan told me he thought her name was Lauren, although he could not remember the rest of it. Pretty girl, very interested in art, Dylan had said. She mentioned she might be able to restore some of your paintings. Why are you asking about this now? I ended the call without giving him an answer and remained sitting in the diner booth. My coffee slowly went cold while the pieces in my mind began clicking together, fitting into place like bullets sliding into a chamber. Lauren Hayes. That had been her name when she first started dating Lucas 8 years ago, fresh out of art school with a degree but very little real talent. I remembered meeting her at Sunday dinner. I watched her flip through my old art books and nod thoughtfully whenever Lucas talked about the potential I had supposedly wasted. She had seemed fascinated with my artistic background, asking about techniques and different periods of art. At the time, I believed she was simply being polite, trying to connect with her future mother-in-law. Now I realized something very different. She had not been bonding with me. She had been shopping. The flood had happened 2 years earlier, right before Lucas and Lauren got married. The timing had been perfect for someone looking to acquire a collection of original artwork, and it left plenty of time to decide how those pieces could be used. I drove home through the dim light before dawn, my thoughts clearer than they had been in years. By the time I reached my apartment, I already had a plan forming in my mind, a plan that would have made Charles proud. Charles had always said I trusted people too easily, but he had also taught me something important. Always keep detailed records of anything that truly matters. In my bedroom closet, tucked behind winter coats I rarely wore, there was a shoebox. Inside it was the documented history of my life as an artist, photographs of paintings, old sketches, and even several exhibition programs from my college years. Everything I needed to prove that Lauren Whitaker's so-called remarkable debut piece had actually been painted by Catherine Bennett during the summer of 2008. I spread the photographs across my kitchen table like a deck of cards, searching for the image I remembered taking of the Miller's Creek landscape. There it was. The third photograph in the stack showed the painting resting on the easel inside my garage studio. The date stamped on the back read July 15, 2008, and the signature in the corner was clearly visible. Bennett. Still, photographs alone would not be enough. If this situation became legal, I would need stronger proof, expert confirmation documentation, something solid enough to stand up in court. At 9 o'clock that morning, I made my first phone call. I called Dr. Diane Harper, my former art professor from the community college. Diane had stayed in contact over the years and had always encouraged me to start painting again. If anyone knew how to verify artistic authenticity, it would be her. When she answered, she sounded pleasantly surprised. She greeted me warmly and asked how I had been doing. I told her honestly that I was doing better than I had in years, but that I needed help with something unusual. I asked how someone might prove that they were the artist behind a particular painting. Diane explained that there were several possible methods. Photographic records could help, signature analysis was another option, and in rare cases paint composition testing could be done. Then she asked why I wanted to know. So I told her everything. I explained about Lauren, the stolen painting, the auction, and even Dylan Hayes' nephew Ryan. Diane listened quietly without interrupting. Occasionally she made small sounds that suggested she was writing things down. When I finished, her voice became more serious. She explained that what I was describing sounded like major art fraud, the kind that could involve federal charges and even prison time. I told her that was exactly why I wanted to handle it properly. Diane said she could help document my work and testify about my artistic style and technique. She still had some of my pieces from class, and she had also kept photographs of student artwork from that period. However, she wanted me to understand something important. This situation was not only about the money. I asked what she meant. Diane pointed out that if Lauren had stolen one painting and claimed it as her own, there was a good chance she had done it more than once. How many other pieces from my collection might she have taken during that flood cleanup? The question hit me like a bucket of ice water. Over the years I had painted dozens of pieces. If I counted smaller studies and sketches, the number might even reach into the hundreds. Dylan had said Ryan's girlfriend had taken some of the art stuff, not just one painting. I told Diane I needed her help figuring out what else Lauren might have taken. She told me to come to her office that afternoon and bring everything I had. Together, she said, we would start building a case that would make the art world pay attention. After the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the photographs scattered across it. Each picture represented hours of work, pieces of my life I had once believed were gone forever. Now I had to wonder how many of them were currently sitting in Lauren's apartment, quietly waiting for their turn in the spotlight. My phone buzzed with a text message from Lucas. He wrote that Lauren had told him I was working at the auction the night before. He said it must have been exciting for me to see her big debut in person. He also mentioned they were planning a celebration dinner for her that evening at Romano's at 7, and asked if I wanted to join them. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Finally, I typed that I would love to hear all about her artistic inspiration. Because if Lauren wanted to continue playing the role of a successful artist, she was about to learn that the woman she had stolen from had some very specific questions about where that inspiration truly came from. And Catherine Whitaker, the invisible champagne server and forgotten mother-in-law, was no longer going to stay polite. Romano's was the kind of restaurant where Lucas liked to bring clients he wanted to impress, with white tablecloths everywhere and bottles of wine that cost more than my entire monthly grocery budget. I arrived exactly at 7, wearing my best dress and the same practiced smile that had carried me through 40 years of marriage to a man who believed feelings were better kept private. Lauren looked radiant, sitting confidently at a corner table, while Lucas beamed beside her like a proud manager who had just discovered the next big star. She had changed out of her gallery clothes into something softer and more artistic, flowing fabric and carefully chosen jewelry that quietly suggested the image of a successful creative professional. Lucas stood to greet me with a hug, his expensive cologne noticeable and his enthusiasm genuine. He said he still could not believe I had been there to witness Lauren's big triumph, and asked what the chances were of that happening. I smiled politely as I took my seat across from them, and told him that the odds truly were astronomical. "Lauren, you must be thrilled," I said. $330,000. That's quite a return on investment. Her smile faltered for a brief moment, so quick that Lucas didn't notice. "I've been working on that piece for months," she replied smoothly. "It's wonderful when something you've poured your heart into finally finds the right home." "Months," I repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me about your process. Where did you find inspiration for such a detailed landscape?" Lauren's eyes met mine across the candlelit table. I could practically see the calculations running behind them. How much did I know? How much did I suspect? And how much could she safely admit? "I spend a lot of time outdoors," she answered carefully. "Natural settings really speak to me. The way the light shifts during the day, the movement of water through a landscape. Miller's Creek is especially beautiful in the summer," I said quietly, watching her reaction. This time she couldn't hide it fast enough. Lauren's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and Lucas looked back and forth between us with the puzzled expression of someone who had clearly missed an important part of the conversation. "I'm sorry," Lauren said. "You're painting, it's Miller's Creek, isn't it? The old oak tree. The curve in the water where the current slows." I nodded. "I used to take Lucas there when he was little," I added. "Do you remember that, honey? You loved catching minnows near that fallen log." Lucas's face lit up instantly. "Oh my God, yes. We used to spend hours there," he said with a laugh. "Lauren, I can't believe you painted our old fishing spot. When did you even see it?" Lauren slowly set her fork down with careful precision. "I explore a lot of locations for inspiration," she explained. "Sometimes I photograph places and then work from memory later." "That's fascinating," I said, leaning forward as if I were genuinely impressed. Because I could have sworn I had some old photographs of that exact spot in my basement before the flood. Same angle, same lighting. Funny coincidence that we both felt inspired to capture it in the exact same way. The silence stretched long enough for Lucas to finally notice something was wrong. He looked from Lauren to me, his confusion growing. "What flood?" he asked. "Catherine, what are you talking about?" "The basement flood 2 years ago," I said calmly. "Remember when that pipe burst and ruined all my old art supplies and paintings? Dylan Hayes handled the cleanup." Lauren had gone perfectly still, her professional composure settling over her like armor. "Lucas mentioned you used to paint," she said evenly. "It must have been awful to lose your work like that." "Oh, but it wasn't all lost," I replied brightly. "Dylan's nephew Ryan helped with the cleanup, and his girlfriend rescued some of the pieces. She thought she might be able to restore them. Isn't that wonderful? It's nice knowing someone appreciated my old work enough to try." Lucas frowned as the pieces began forming in his mind. "Lauren, your maiden name was Hayes," he said slowly. "Is Ryan your cousin?" At that exact moment, the waiter appeared with our wine, giving Lauren a few valuable seconds to prepare her answer. Once the waiter left, her smile returned, carefully balanced, apologetic without looking guilty. "I probably should have mentioned it earlier," she said. "Yes, Ryan is my cousin. When he told me about the water-damaged paintings, I offered to look at them. Most of them were beyond saving, but a few had potential. I've been studying restoration techniques." "So you restored Catherine's paintings?" Lucas asked, clearly pleased by this unexpected family connection. "I tried to save what I could," Lauren replied smoothly. "But restoration can be transformative. Sometimes you end up with something very different from the original." I nodded thoughtfully. "Different in what way?" "Well, Lauren said. Water damage often destroys original signatures, making it impossible to confirm who the artist was. And sometimes the restoration work is so extensive that it becomes a collaboration between the original artist and the person restoring it. The final piece becomes something new. She was good, I had to admit that. Not just at lying, but at building lies that sounded perfectly reasonable to someone who didn't know the truth. Lucas nodded along, clearly impressed with both her knowledge and her generosity. That's incredible, Lauren, he said. So Catherine's old paintings basically inspired your new work. In a way, yes, Lauren replied, looking directly into my eyes. Sometimes the past creates a foundation for future creativity. I smiled and raised my wine glass. To future creativity, I said softly. Especially when it's built on such solid foundations. We drank. Lauren's hand remained steady as she lifted her glass, but the message in her eyes was unmistakable. I know that you know, and I'm not afraid. The rest of dinner continued with polite conversation, while Lucas excitedly talked about Lauren's growing career. She had been accepted into a group exhibition the following month. 2 galleries were already interested in her work. There was even talk of a solo show in the spring. All of it built on the foundation of my stolen life's work. When we finally said goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, Lauren hugged me warmly like the perfect daughter-in-law. Thank you for coming tonight, Catherine, she said sweetly. It means a lot to have family support. Family should always look out for one another, I replied, hugging her back just as warmly. I can't wait to see what you create next. As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Lauren believed she had won this round. By framing everything as restoration work and claiming the artistic transformation as her own, she had built a story that shielded her from accusations of outright theft while still allowing her to profit from my work. But Lauren had made 2 serious mistakes that night. First, she underestimated how much I had learned about patience during 40 years of marriage to Charles Whitaker. Strategic patience, the kind that waits quietly until the right moment arrives. Second, she assumed that Catherine Whitaker, grieving widow and occasional server of champagne, was the same person as Ellie Bennett, the woman who had once been bold enough to believe she could paint the world exactly as she saw it. The next morning I planned to call Dr. Harper and tell her about Lauren's interesting theory regarding restoration as a form of artistic collaboration. After that, I would call Dylan Hayes again and ask several very precise questions about which paintings Ryan had taken from my basement. Because if Lauren wanted to play games with artistic attribution and collaborative restoration, I was about to introduce her to rules she clearly had never learned in art school. Beginning with the most important rule of all. Always know exactly who you are stealing from. Dr. Diane Harper's office at the community college looked exactly the same as I remembered from the continuing education classes I had taken 15 years earlier. Every wall was covered with paintings. Some were professional works, but most were student pieces that simply showed promise. Diane had always believed that potential deserved to be displayed alongside achievement. Catherine, you look different, she said, peering at me over the rim of her reading glasses. You look determined. I like it. I laid out my documentation across her desk, photographs, sketches, and even the careful notes I had kept about the paint colors and techniques used in each piece. 40 years of marriage to an accountant had trained me well when it came to documenting important things. Tell me about this restoration theory Lauren mentioned, Diane said as she began studying the photographs. I explained Lauren's argument. That water damage had made the original signatures unreadable, and that extensive restoration work could turn the process into a collaboration between the original artist and the restorer, essentially transforming the painting into a new piece of art. Diane gave a short snort. That is complete nonsense from a legal perspective, she said firmly. Restoration work, no matter how extensive, never transfers artistic ownership. If someone restores a damaged Monet, they do not suddenly become the co-creator of a Monet. The original artist is still the original artist. She picked up a magnifying glass and examined the photograph of my Miller's Creek painting. And besides, she continued, this is not restoration. This is forgery. She pointed to the signature where Lauren Whitaker's name had been written over my original M. Bennett. Under magnification you can see the difference in paint layers, Diane explained. Notice how Lauren's signature sits on top of the surface instead of blending into the final paint layer. Your original signature was covered up, not restored. That's deliberate fraud. I asked her what kind of evidence would hold up if this went to court. Everything you've brought me, she answered. Plus I can provide expert testimony about your artistic style and techniques. But Catherine, we need to understand the full scope of what she's done. How many paintings are involved? I handed her the list I had created after speaking with Dylan Hayes that morning. 23 paintings. They ranged from small studies to larger works like the Miller's Creek landscape. Dylan remembered the number clearly because Ryan had borrowed his truck twice in order to transport all the pieces. My God, Diane said quietly. If she's selling these works at prices similar to the Miller's Creek painting, we could be looking at fraud worth millions of dollars. There's something else, I added as I pulled out my phone. That morning I had spent hours researching Lauren Whitaker's artistic career online. Lauren had graduated from art school with average grades. Before marrying Lucas, she had no gallery representation and no exhibitions under her own name. In fact, there had been no recorded sales of her work until about 18 months earlier. Then suddenly her career exploded. She began producing sophisticated landscape paintings that immediately caught the attention of critics. Her artistic style appeared to mature almost overnight, right around the same time as the basement flood. Before that, I explained, her work had been described as promising but technically weak. Diane began taking notes quickly. We need to examine the other paintings she has claimed as original, she said. The one she's been showing publicly. I might be able to help with that, I replied. Lauren mentioned she'll be part of a group exhibition next month at the Riverside Gallery. I could attend the opening. Diane's eyes lit up with sudden excitement. Even better, she said. I know the curator at Riverside. Isabel Navarro and I went to graduate school together. She would be very interested in questions of artistic authenticity, especially if fraud might be involved. She immediately picked up her phone. Isabel, this is Diane Harper, she said when the call connected. I may have something you'll want to hear about. Tell me, how familiar are you with Lauren Whitaker's work? I listened while Diane carried on a conversation that quickly became more and more interesting. Apparently Isabel Navarro had already noticed something unusual about Lauren Whitaker's rapid rise in the art world. The sophistication of Lauren's technique didn't match the timeline of her education or experience. There had even been quiet whispers circulating in the art community questioning the authenticity of her work. When Diane finished the call, she looked at me with a thoughtful expression. Isabel would like to meet you, she said. Tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. She's already been collecting information about Lauren Whitaker, and your documentation might be exactly what she needs. As I drove home, I felt the quiet satisfaction of everything slowly falling into place. Lauren had built her entire career on paintings she stole from me, but she had made one more mistake. Instead of quietly selling one or two pieces and building a modest reputation, she had grown greedy. She had created an entire body of work that was far too sophisticated for someone with her limited artistic background. That evening Lucas called during his usual weekly check-in. His voice was full of excitement as he shared new developments about Lauren's growing success. Mom, you won't believe this, he said enthusiastically. Lauren was just offered a solo exhibition at the Whitmore Gallery in 6 months. Catherine Langley thinks she could become the next major landscape artist. We're talking about a 20-piece show, with sale prices starting at $50,000. 20 pieces. Exactly the number I had estimated Lauren had taken from my collection. That's wonderful, dear, I replied calmly. Lauren must be thrilled about the chance to display her life's work. She's been working nonstop preparing for the show, Lucas said. I barely see her anymore. She's completely focused on making the exhibition perfect. I could imagine that transforming stolen paintings into new original works required quite a bit of time and effort. Lucas, I asked gently, has Lauren ever talked about her artistic influences? Where she draws her inspiration from? That's interesting you ask, he said. She's mentioned studying historical landscape techniques, looking at how earlier artists captured natural light and the movement of water. She says understanding the masters helps her develop her own voice. Understanding the masters, or understanding how to paint over their signatures and claim their work as her own. After I hung up, I sat alone in my quiet apartment thinking about justice. For 16 years I had believed my artistic life was over. Not just finished but erased. Washed away in that basement flood that seemed like final proof that my creative dreams had been foolish all along. But my work had not been destroyed. It had been stolen. Its value had finally been recognized by someone who understood its worth better than I ever allowed myself to believe. Lauren Whitaker had built an entire career on my artistic ability, and now she was preparing a major exhibition that would cement her reputation as a talented landscape painter. But she had made one critical mistake. She believed that Catherine Whitaker, the quiet serving woman in the simple black dress, would never discover what had been taken from her. And even if I did discover it, she assumed I would never have the courage or the knowledge to fight back. Tomorrow I would meet with Isabel Navarro and add my documentation to whatever file she had already been building. Then I would attend Lauren's group show opening and see exactly how many of my stolen paintings were hanging on the walls under her name. Because Lauren Whitaker was about to learn that some collaborations are not voluntary, and some restorations involve returning the work to its rightful creator. Isabel Navarro met me at a coffee shop near the Riverside Gallery. She carried a leather portfolio that looked serious enough to hold legal documents. She was younger than I had expected, perhaps around 40, with a kind of focused intensity that suggested she had little patience for small talk. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "thank you for meeting with me. Diane Harper showed me your documentation, and honestly it confirms suspicions I have had about Lauren Whitaker's work for months." She opened her portfolio and spread several photographs across the table. They showed Lauren's paintings from different exhibitions over the past year, 8 landscapes in total. Each one displayed a level of technical sophistication that Isabel clearly found questionable. "Look at the progression," she said, pointing to the dates and gallery names. 18 months ago Lauren Whitaker was a recent art school graduate with basic skills. Then suddenly she begins producing work like this. I studied the photographs. I recognized them. Lauren had altered them enough that a casual viewer might not notice, but they were unmistakably mine. My summer meadow study had been renamed Wildflower Reverie. My winter stream scene had become Frozen Contemplation. "The technical leap is impossible," Isabel continued. "You do not go from student-level work to this level of mastery in 18 months, not without years of intensive training or direct access to work by established artists. Or access to finished paintings that you can claim as your own," I said quietly. "Exactly," Isabel replied. "Diane told me about the flood and the connection through Lauren's cousin. Mrs. Whitaker, I believe Lauren has been systematically presenting your work as her own for more than a year." She pulled out another set of photographs showing close-up images of signatures and brushwork. "I have been documenting every painting of hers that I could find," Isabel explained. "Look closely at the signatures." Under magnification, the same pattern appeared in every painting. Original signatures had been painted over and replaced with Lauren's careful handwriting, just like the Miller's Creek landscape that sold for $330,000. "This is systematic art fraud," Isabel said firmly. "And next week's group exhibition will give us the perfect opportunity to document it properly." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "I need you to attend the opening as my guest," she replied. "Bring your documentation and be ready to identify your original paintings. I will have a photographer there to document everything we discover." She handed me a business card. "There is something else you should know," she added. "I have been in contact with the FBI's art crime team. They have been investigating a growing number of fraud cases involving emerging artists, and Lauren Whitaker's sudden success fits their pattern." FBI. The full weight of what Lauren had done began to settle in. This was no longer just a family argument over a few old paintings. This was a federal crime. "Isabel," I said quietly, "what will happen to Lucas? My son. He has no idea what Lauren has been doing. If he truly has no involvement, he should be fine legally," Isabel answered carefully. "But Mrs. Whitaker, you need to understand something. This situation is likely to destroy their marriage. Financial fraud, criminal charges, possible prison time. Your daughter-in-law is facing very serious consequences." I thought about Lucas's excited phone calls, the pride in his voice whenever he spoke about Lauren's success, and the future he believed they were building around her artistic career. At 42 years old, he was still hopeful enough to believe the best about the people he loved. "He deserves to know the truth," I said finally. "The truth will come out regardless," Isabel replied. The question is whether you want to control how and when that happens, or allow the FBI investigation to move forward without your involvement. The following Friday morning, 1 week before the group show opening, I called Lucas and asked if he could meet me for lunch. He suggested our usual spot, a casual restaurant where he could grab a quick meal between client meetings. Lucas arrived exactly on time. He kissed my cheek in greeting while still checking messages on his phone. His success in the engineering consulting world had made him busier than ever, though not necessarily happier. How is Lauren's preparation for the show going? I asked once we had ordered. Incredible, he said immediately. She's been working 16-hour days trying to perfect every detail. The gallery wants her to include some earlier pieces to show her artistic development. So she's been reviewing her entire portfolio. Earlier pieces. My stolen paintings that Lauren intended to display as proof of her artistic growth. Lucas, I said carefully, there is something important I need to tell you about Lauren's artwork. He finally put his phone down and gave me his full attention. What do you mean? I told him everything. I explained about the basement flood, Ryan Hayes, the Miller's Creek painting at the auction, and my meetings with Dr. Harper and Isabel Navarro. I kept my voice steady and factual, presenting everything the same way Charles used to present financial reports to clients. Lucas's expression changed several times as he listened. First confusion, then disbelief, then anger, and finally a kind of sick realization as the details began connecting in his mind. Mom, this is crazy, he said quietly. You are accusing my wife of art fraud. I am telling you what I discovered when I saw my own painting being sold with her signature on it. Maybe there is some misunderstanding, he said quickly. You said Ryan took damaged paintings for restoration. Maybe Lauren really believed they could not be saved, and that her restoration work created something new. I took out my phone and showed him the photograph Diane had taken of the signature overlay on the Miller's Creek painting. Does this look like restoration work to you? Lucas studied the image for a long time. His engineering mind, trained to examine structural problems and trace their causes, was now applying the same logic to his own marriage. Jesus Christ, he whispered. How many paintings are we talking about? 23 that I can prove, I answered. Possibly more that I never photographed or forgot about. And the value? If they are selling for prices similar to the Miller's Creek painting, potentially millions of dollars. Lucas lowered his head into his hands. When he finally looked up, the expression in his eyes reminded me painfully of the day we buried his father. What am I supposed to do, Mom? You talk to Lauren before next Friday's exhibition, I said gently. Give her a chance to explain or come forward on her own. After that, Isabel Navarro and the FBI will handle everything. The FBI? His voice cracked slightly. Mom, Lauren could go to prison. Yes, I said softly. She could. We sat there quietly for several minutes while Lucas struggled to process the collapse of the future he believed he had built. Finally, he spoke again. She knew, didn't she? He said slowly. At the auction when you two looked at each other. That is why she has been so stressed about this upcoming show. I think she has known for some time that this moment might come. Lucas's phone buzzed again with a message, and he glanced at it automatically. It is Lauren, he said after a moment. She is asking if we can postpone dinner tonight because she needs to stay late working on preparations for the exhibition. He looked at me again, his face suddenly older than it had been an hour earlier. I guess I know what she is really preparing for. Friday afternoon, as I got ready to attend Lauren's group show opening, I found myself thinking about the woman I had been when I first walked into the Whitmore Gallery 3 months earlier. Invisible Catherine Whitaker. The woman serving champagne to people living the life she had once dreamed of. A woman grateful for minimum wage and too afraid to want anything beyond simple survival. That woman no longer existed. In her place stood someone who remembered what it felt like to believe in her own value, to fight for what was rightfully hers, and to refuse to disappear simply because someone else found it convenient. Lauren Whitaker was about to discover that stealing from the wrong person can become the most expensive mistake you will ever make. But first, I thought, she is going to have to explain to a room full of art experts exactly where her remarkable artistic talent came from. And I would be there to help her tell that story. The opening night at the Riverside Gallery looked exactly like the world Lauren now belonged to. Elegant guests stood with wine glasses in their hands, speaking in soft voices about artistic vision and emotional authenticity. I arrived a little late, dressed in my best black dress and wearing the pearl earrings Charles had given me for our 20th anniversary. Isabel Navarro spotted me within a few minutes. She was accompanied by a young man carrying an expensive camera, his expression focused in the way of someone documenting evidence. "Catherine, this is Victor Lin, our photographer," she said. "He will be taking detailed photographs of everything we discussed this evening." I nodded. Strangely, I felt calm, even though I knew that what happened tonight would change everything. Around me, people admired Lauren's impressive artistic development, while I quietly prepared to reveal exactly how that development had actually occurred. Lauren looked radiant in a flowing midnight blue dress. Her hair was styled up, showing diamond earrings that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was standing near a painting I recognized immediately, my autumn forest study. Lauren had retitled it Seasonal Transition and placed a price tag of $45,000 beside it. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said warmly as she approached me with her flawless gallery smile. She kissed the air beside my cheeks as if we were the closest of friends. "I am so glad you came. Lucas mentioned you were not feeling well." "I am feeling much better now," I replied, watching her face carefully for any sign that she sensed something different about tonight. "Seeing your work displayed so beautifully is very inspiring." Her smile remained steady, but I noticed a quick glance she sent toward the gallery entrance. She was probably looking for Lucas, or perhaps for Isabel Navarro, whose reputation in the world of art authentication Lauren would certainly recognize. "I would love to hear about your artistic process for this painting," I said, gesturing toward my stolen autumn forest. "The way you captured the light through the leaves is very sophisticated." "Oh, you know how it is," Lauren said with a light laugh that carried easily to nearby guests. "Sometimes inspiration simply strikes, and suddenly your hands know exactly what to do." "Yes," I replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes they do. Especially when those hands have spent years practicing how to capture that exact lighting effect." This time her smile faltered briefly. "I'm sorry," she asked. "Nothing important," I said pleasantly. I was just remembering how I used to spend hours in that same forest studying how afternoon sunlight changes the color of autumn leaves. Lauren's eyes sharpened slightly as she began making rapid calculations. Around us, the other guests continued chatting, completely unaware that they were watching the opening moves of a far more serious confrontation. "Catherine, you should meet some of the other artists tonight," Lauren said gently, though there was a subtle warning in her voice. "I would hate for you to spend the entire evening thinking about the past." "Oh, I'm very interested in the present," I said, "and the future as well." Right on cue, Isabel Navarro stepped beside us. "Lauren, congratulations on a wonderful exhibition," she said smoothly. "I'm Isabel Navarro from the Riverside curatorial staff. Would you mind answering a few questions about your artistic development?" I watched Lauren's face closely as Isabel introduced herself. Recognition flashed in her eyes, followed quickly by concern. A moment later it was replaced by perfect professional politeness. "Of course," Lauren replied. "Although I should mention my husband will be arriving soon, and I promise to introduce him to everyone." "This will only take a moment," Isabel assured her. "I am particularly curious about how your technique has evolved during the past 2 years. Your earlier work showed potential, but the sophistication you demonstrate now is quite a dramatic leap." "Intensive study," Lauren said calmly, "along with mentorship from experienced artists." "Could you tell me more about these mentors?" Isabel asked. "I'm always interested in how emerging artists refine their skills." Lauren glanced around the room again, clearly searching for a way to end the conversation. "It was mostly informal," she replied. "Learning from established techniques, studying historical approaches to landscape painting." "Fascinating," Isabel said, gesturing toward my autumn forest painting. "The brushwork in this piece demonstrates mastery of techniques that typically take decades to develop." "Sometimes talent evolves in unexpected ways," Lauren answered, her voice growing noticeably cooler. Isabel took out her phone and showed Lauren a photograph. It was the picture I had taken of my original autumn forest painting back in 2007, complete with my signature and the date stamped on the back. Would you say this earlier version influenced your current work? Isabel asked calmly. The color slowly drained from Lauren's face as she stared at the photograph. Around us, the gallery conversations continued, but the three of us stood inside a small circle of sudden electric tension. I'm not sure what you're implying, Lauren said carefully. I'm not implying anything, Isabel replied evenly. I'm asking direct questions about artistic provenance and authenticity. The same questions the FBI art crime team will be asking next week. Lauren's composure finally began to crack. I think this conversation is over, she said sharply. Actually, I said quietly, I believe it's just beginning. I looked directly at her. You see, Lauren, that photograph Isabel just showed you? I took it 13 years ago. It shows a painting I created. The same painting you have been selling as your own work. Lauren's eyes moved back and forth between Isabel and me, her polished gallery persona fading into something much closer to panic. You can't prove anything, she said. Oh, but we can, Isabel answered pleasantly. Signature analysis, paint composition testing, photographic documentation going back more than a decade. Mrs. Whitaker has been extremely thorough in documenting her artistic work. At that exact moment, Lucas walked into the gallery. I watched Lauren's face as she saw him approaching. He looked terrible, pale, exhausted, and hollow-eyed, like a man who had spent the last week watching his entire life collapse. Lauren, he said quietly when he reached us, we need to talk. Not here, she whispered urgently. Not now. Then where? Lucas asked. When? After the FBI arrests you. His words carried farther than he intended. Nearby conversations began to slow as people turned their heads toward us. Lauren's entire career depended on reputation and connections, and Lucas had just threatened both in front of her professional community. Lucas, you're making a scene, Lauren said through clenched teeth. I'm making a scene, he replied bitterly. You built our entire life on stolen art, and I'm the one causing problems? Isabel stepped calmly between them. Perhaps we should continue this discussion somewhere more private, she suggested. But Lauren was already moving quickly toward the gallery's back exit. I followed her, my heart pounding as I realized everything was finally reaching its breaking point. Outside, in the alley behind the gallery, Lauren turned toward me with a fury that was no longer hidden behind professional politeness. You vindictive old woman, she snapped. You couldn't stand seeing someone actually succeed with your mediocre work. My mediocre work, I replied calmly. The same work you've been selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars? That work was rotting in your basement, Lauren shot back. You had abandoned it. I saved those paintings and made them valuable. Lucas stared at her as if he were seeing his wife for the very first time. Lauren, you stole from my mother. I rescued art from being forgotten, she said coldly. Your mother was serving champagne for minimum wage while masterpieces collected dust in her apartment. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. To Lauren, I had never been a person. I was simply an obstacle. My life's work was nothing more than raw material for her ambitions. You are right about one thing, I said quietly. I had given up. I met her eyes. But you made one mistake, Lauren. You assumed I would stay that way. Police sirens began to echo through the street. Isabel had clearly followed through on her warning to contact law enforcement. Lauren heard them too. Her expression shifted again, from anger to cold calculation, as she realized her options were disappearing quickly. This isn't over, she said, staring directly at me. You have no idea what you're destroying. I know exactly what I'm destroying, I answered calmly. I'm ending a criminal operation built on my stolen life's work. And I'm enjoying every minute of it. 2 police vehicles turned into the alley, their flashing lights coloring the brick walls in red and blue. Lauren Whitaker's career as a celebrated rising artist was about to end very suddenly. But my life, the one where I refused to remain invisible, was only just beginning. The arrest itself was almost anticlimactic. There were no dramatic struggles or shouting. Only 2 federal agents in dark suits calmly informing Lauren of her rights, while she maintained the composed expression of someone who had secretly been preparing for this moment. Hayes, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit art fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. I stood in the gallery doorway and watched as they escorted her toward an unmarked sedan. Lucas remained motionless in the alley, looking like someone who had just watched a car crash involving his entire future. About 20 minutes later, Agent Elena Navarro, no relation to Isabel, found me sitting in the gallery's back office. I was giving my statement to a young FBI technician named Williams. "Mrs. Whitaker," Agent Navarro said, "we are going to need your cooperation for this investigation. This case appears to be larger than we first believed." "Larger?" I asked. "In what way?" She sat across from me, her expression serious. "Your daughter-in-law was not working alone. We have been tracking a network of art fraud cases involving restoration work on supposedly damaged pieces. Lauren Whitaker appears to have been part of a much larger operation. The implications hit me like ice water. How many other artists has she stolen from?" "We do not know yet," Agent Navarro replied. "But we have already identified at least 12 other cases where emerging artists suddenly showed dramatic improvements in technical ability, often shortly after gaining access to collections of damaged artwork." Williams looked up from his laptop. "Mrs. Whitaker, when you spoke with Dylan Hayes about the flood cleanup, did he mention anyone else who was interested in those damaged paintings?" "Ryan Hayes was the only person he mentioned," I answered. "Lauren's cousin." "We need to speak with Ryan Hayes," Agent Navarro said. "And we also need a complete inventory of every painting that was taken from your collection." During the next 3 hours, I provided the most detailed account of my artistic life I could remember. I listed every painting, every technique I had used, even the specific brands of paint I preferred. Williams photographed my documentation while Agent Navarro continued asking questions that revealed how much the FBI had already discovered about Lauren's activities. "Mrs. Whitaker," she asked at one point, "did Lauren ever mention other artists she was mentoring or collaborating with?" I thought back to the conversations I had overheard during my days serving champagne at gallery events. "She often talked about studying historical landscape techniques," I said. "But I assumed she meant books or museum visits." Agent Navarro shook her head slightly. "We believe she meant studying actual paintings, pieces that had been reported as damaged or destroyed. Insurance fraud combined with art theft. The scale of what Lauren had been involved in was staggering. She had not only stolen from one grieving widow, she had been part of a systematic operation looting works of art across the country." Lucas found me at the FBI office around midnight. He looked as though he had aged 10 years in a single evening. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I had no idea." "I know, honey. She's been lying to me for years," he continued. "About everything. Her family background, her artistic training, even how we first met." Agent Navarro looked up from the files in front of her. "Mr. Whitaker, what do you mean about how you met?" Lucas rubbed his eyes, exhausted. "Lauren told me she was working as a gallery assistant when we met. Tonight I discovered she was actually working for a restoration company that handled insurance claims. She was targeting collections that had suffered damage." "Including mine," I said quietly. "Yes," Lucas replied. "Including yours." He looked down at the floor. "She researched you after learning about the flood through Ryan. She discovered you were a widow with very little family support. Someone unlikely to pursue legal action, even if the theft was discovered. The cold calculation behind Lauren's actions felt worse than the theft itself. She had studied my life carefully, identified me as an easy target, and even built a relationship with my son as a way to secure access to my artwork." "There's something else," Lucas added. "I found files in her home office. Documentation about other artists, other collections." He looked at me. "Mom, Lauren wasn't just stealing your paintings. She was running an entire business based on art fraud." Agent Navarro leaned forward. "What kind of documentation?" "Photographs, research notes, financial projections about the value of stolen artwork. She had folders on dozens of artists." "Lucas," Agent Navarro said firmly, "we need to see those files." "They're in our home safe," he replied. "Lauren doesn't know I know the combination." By 3 o'clock in the morning, I was sitting in Lauren and Lucas's spotless living room, while FBI agents carefully photographed the contents of a safe that held the business records of a multi-million-dollar art fraud operation. Lauren had documented everything: where the paintings had been obtained, how much restoration work would be needed to make them sellable, which galleries were most likely to accept questionable provenance, even which art critics might be persuaded to write favorable reviews. My own folder was thick. Inside were photographs of all 23 paintings Ryan had taken from my basement, along with detailed notes analyzing my artistic style and techniques. Lauren had studied my work more carefully than any art critic ever had. But what truly made my blood run cold was realizing that I had not been her first victim. The files revealed a pattern stretching back 5 years. Lauren had been targeting elderly artists whose work had supposedly been damaged or destroyed. Insurance claims were filed for lost collections, while the same paintings quietly reappeared in galleries through Lauren's connections. Mrs. Whitaker, Agent Navarro said, holding up a photograph from Lauren's files. Have you ever seen this woman before? The photo showed an elderly woman, perhaps 75 years old, standing proudly beside a painting of crashing ocean waves. Her expression radiated pride and quiet accomplishment. I don't think so, I said. Who is she? Catherine Holloway, Agent Navarro replied. She died 2 years ago. Officially she died in poverty, despite being known as a talented marine painter. After her death, her family donated what they believed were her remaining works to charity. Agent Navarro spread out more photographs from Catherine Holloway's file. There were dozens of paintings, each documented with the same careful attention Lauren had given to my own collection. We believe Catherine Holloway's family was told her paintings had been destroyed in a house fire, Agent Navarro explained. Meanwhile, Lauren was selling those same works through high-end galleries, presenting them as her own early experiments with marine landscapes. The scale of Lauren's operation was staggering. This was not simple theft. It was organized looting disguised as artistic development, targeting families who trusted that their loved ones' artistic legacies had been lost to accidents. How many artists are involved? I asked quietly. So far we have identified 15 cases, Agent Navarro answered. The estimated value of the stolen artwork is approaching $8 million. $8 million. $8 million worth of stolen dreams, stolen legacies, stolen lifetimes of work. Artists who had died believing their contributions had been erased by floods, fires, and accidents, never knowing their paintings were being praised and sold under someone else's name. Dawn was breaking by the time the FBI finished documenting Lauren's files. I stood on the front steps of the house where I had attended so many family dinners, watching agents carry boxes of evidence to their cars. Lucas came outside and handed me a cup of coffee that smelled like salvation. What happens now? He asked quietly. Justice, I replied. For Catherine Holloway and 14 other artists who deserved recognition for work that should never have been forgotten. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, the kind of light that had inspired nearly every landscape painting I had ever created. For the first time in years, I looked at that light and felt the urge to paint it myself. Lauren Whitaker had stolen my past. But in doing so, she had accidentally given me something far more valuable. She reminded me that my work had always been worth fighting for. The media attention started the very next morning. Emerging artist arrested in multi-million-dollar art fraud scheme appeared as the headline in major newspapers. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly with reporters hoping to interview the elderly victim who had helped expose the forgery network. I let every call go to voicemail. I was not ready to become anyone's inspirational headline. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, Dr. Diane Harper called with news that made my hands tremble. Catherine, she said, the Whitmore Gallery contacted me. They want to host a retrospective of your original work. They are calling it Recovered, the Art of Catherine Bennett. My work isn't famous enough for a retrospective, I said. It is now, Diane replied. 16 of your paintings have sold for six-figure prices over the past 2 years. Whether you realized it or not, you are already a recognized artist. The irony cut sharply. Lauren's theft had made my work more successful than it had ever been when I was actually painting it. Diane, I said quietly, I haven't painted in 8 years. Then maybe it's time you started again. That evening I drove to the storage unit where I had kept Charles's belongings after selling the house. Behind boxes of his accounting files and old furniture, I found the art supplies I had packed away after his death. Brushes stiff with dried paint. Tubes of color that might still work. The small easel I had used for quick studies. Loading everything into my car felt like excavating a lost part of my own life. Who was Catherine Bennett? Did she still exist? Or had too many years of being Charles's wife and Lucas's mother erased her completely? I set up the easel in the small living room of my apartment, facing the window that overlooked the city. The evening light was terrible for painting, but it was the light I had. The first brushstroke felt like returning home. I painted for 3 hours without stopping, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of color and composition. I was not attempting anything ambitious, only a simple study of the view outside my window. But my hands remembered things my mind had forgotten. How to layer colors to create depth. How to suggest texture with only a few strokes. How to capture the way light shifts and moves. When I finally stepped back to look at the painting, tears blurred my vision. It was not my best work, but it was mine. Created by my own hands. Signed with my own name. Belonging to no one except me. The following morning I opened the newspaper and saw my story on the front page of the arts section. A reporter had located Catherine Holloway's daughter, who shared her thoughts about discovering that her mother's missing paintings had been recovered through my case. My mother died believing her life's work had been destroyed. Diane Holloway was quoted as saying, "To learn that someone was selling her paintings and claiming her vision as their own is heartbreaking. But it also proves something important. Mom's work was good enough to steal." Later that afternoon I called Diane Holloway. She lived 3 hours away in the same coastal town where her mother had painted ocean landscapes for 40 years. "Holloway, this is Catherine Whitaker," I said when she answered the phone. "Catherine Bennett, I suppose I should say." There was a brief silence before her voice returned, full of emotion. "Oh my God. You're the one who exposed everything. I've been wanting to thank you. I think we should meet," I said. "All of us. The families affected by Lauren's fraud." "That's a wonderful idea," Diane replied. "There are things the FBI hasn't told the media yet. Things about how large this operation really was." We arranged to meet the following Saturday at Catherine Holloway's former studio. Diane had preserved the place exactly as her mother left it. The drive along the coast gave me plenty of time to think about legacy and recognition, about how Lauren's crime had revealed the value of artwork that had supposedly been forgotten. Catherine Holloway's studio had once been a converted garage facing the ocean. Large windows were positioned to catch the shifting natural light throughout the day. Her final painting still rested on the easel. It was an unfinished seascape, but even incomplete it showed a master's understanding of water, movement, and light. Diane Holloway was around my age, perhaps 65. She had inherited her mother's artistic eye but her father's practicality. She had spent 40 years working as a schoolteacher while raising her own family and helping Catherine maintain a modest career selling paintings to tourists and seasonal visitors. "Mom never sold a painting for more than $500, Diane said as we looked through Catherine's remaining work. "She always said she painted for the joy of it, not the money." She paused, looking at one of the canvases. But seeing those same paintings sell for $50,000 each under someone else's name, it proved she was better than she ever believed. That's what hurts the most. Mom died thinking she was just a hobbyist, a kind woman who painted nice pictures for tourists. I understood that feeling far too well. How many artists died believing their work didn't matter, never realizing that someone else might one day recognize its true worth. "Diane," I said, "I want to organize something." She looked at me curiously. "A group exhibition," I continued, "featuring the recovered work from every artist Lauren stole from. Not presented as victims, but as the accomplished artists they truly were." Diane's face brightened instantly, the same excitement I had seen in Diane Harper whenever she recognized a good idea. "A celebration instead of a memorial," she said. "Mom would have loved that." We spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. Diane had connections within the coastal art community, while I now had unexpected connections through the FBI investigation and the media coverage surrounding the case. Together, we realized we could create an exhibition that honored the original artists while revealing the full scale of Lauren's crimes. As I drove home, I felt something I had not experienced in years. Excitement. The thrill of working towards something meaningful again. This was no longer only about recovering my stolen past. It was about building something new from the wreckage Lauren had left behind. Just as I reached the city limits, my phone rang. It was Lucas. His voice carried news serious enough that I pulled the car to the side of the road so I could listen properly. "Mom, Lauren's lawyer contacted me," he said. "She wants to make a deal with the FBI. She's offering information about the entire forgery network in exchange for reduced charges." "What kind of information?" "Names, locations, financial records." The FBI believes she was only a mid-level participant in something much larger. That revelation changed everything. Lauren was not the criminal mastermind I had imagined. She had been another kind of victim, recruited and manipulated by people who recognized her hunger for artistic success and used it for their own profit. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it explained how a small-town art school graduate had managed to carry out such complex fraud. She had guidance, support, and probably threats to keep her from stepping out of line. "Lucas," I asked gently, "how are you holding up through all this?" There was a long pause before he answered. "I'm leaving her." His voice was quiet but certain. "I have to. Not just because of the fraud, but because she looked me in the eyes for 3 years and lied about everything that mattered. You can't rebuild a marriage on that." I thought about Charles. 40 years of marriage built on honesty and shared values. Lucas deserved that kind of partnership, not one built on calculated deception. "I'm sorry, honey," I said softly. "I know you loved her." "I loved the person I thought she was," he replied. "Turns out that person never existed." After the call ended, I sat in my car watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that practically demanded to be captured on canvas. Tomorrow I would call the Whitmore Gallery about the retrospective. I would begin planning the group exhibition with Diane Holloway. And I would start reclaiming Catherine Bennett from the quiet ashes of Catherine Whitaker's invisible life. Lauren had stolen my past, but she had accidentally shown me something far more important. I still had a future worth fighting for. The phone rang at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Lauren's arrest. Agent Navarro sounded exhausted but determined. "Mrs. Whitaker, we need you to come in immediately," she said. "Lauren's cooperation has uncovered something we did not expect." "What kind of something?" "She was not just stealing from individual artists," Navarro explained. "She was part of a network that has been systematically looting museum storage facilities, insurance salvage operations, and estate sales. We're talking about organized crime on a national level." An hour later, I was sitting inside the FBI field office studying photographs and documents that revealed the true scale of the operation Lauren had been involved in. Names, addresses, financial records stretching back more than a decade. A criminal network responsible for stealing millions of dollars worth of artwork from dozens of sources. "This is not just fraud," Agent Navarro explained. "This is cultural theft. They have been erasing artistic legacies and redistributing them for profit." The most important piece of evidence Lauren had provided was a ledger. It contained detailed records of every artwork that had passed through their operation, artists' names, how the pieces were acquired, sale prices, gallery contacts. It was essentially a business plan for the systematic destruction of American artistic heritage. "Mrs. Whitaker," Agent Navarro continued, "your case is what broke this entire operation open. Without your documentation and your willingness to pursue prosecution, we would never have uncovered the full network." I looked through photographs of other stolen works. Many styles and techniques were instantly recognizable. Some pieces were abstract expressionist works from the 1960s. Others were folk art created in rural communities. A few even appeared to belong to museum collections. "How is that possible?" I asked. "Museums have security and authentication systems. Storage facilities are not nearly as secure as exhibition areas," Agent Navarro replied. "Many museums have thousands of pieces stored away that are rarely reviewed or inventoried. If a few disappear and paperwork claims they were damaged or destroyed, it can take years before anyone notices." She handed me another folder labeled Recovery Operations. Inside were photographs of artwork being returned to families, museums, and estates that had been told their pieces were lost forever. "This is what your courage made possible," she said. 17 families have recovered the work of their loved ones. 4 museums have reclaimed pieces they believed were permanently lost. And we have located approximately 300 additional stolen artworks. I slowly flipped through the photographs. People holding paintings. Sculptures being returned. Drawings reunited with the families of the artists who created them. I saw elderly women like Diane Holloway holding their mother's paintings again. Adult children discovering that their father's sculptures had not been destroyed in warehouse fires after all. What will happen to Lauren? I asked quietly. She will serve prison time, Agent Navarro said. But likely less than she would have received if she had refused to cooperate. The information she provided will allow us to prosecute the organizers of this network, people who have been stealing from artists for more than a decade. Later that afternoon, I drove to Lucas's apartment. He had moved out of the house he once shared with Lauren only a few days after her arrest. He looked healthier than he had in weeks, like someone who had finally put down a heavy burden he had been carrying without realizing it. "Mom," he said when I arrived, "I have been thinking about what you said about rebuilding your artistic career. What about it? I want to help." "Help how?" "Not financially," he explained quickly. "I know you do not need that anymore. But practically, you will need a studio, proper equipment, maybe help with exhibitions and marketing." His offer touched me more than he probably understood. For years Lucas had politely treated my artistic ambitions as hobbies. Now he was offering to help turn them into something real. "Lucas," I said gently, "are you sure about this? You have your own career to focus on." "My career is fine," he replied. "It's my life that needs rebuilding. I want to do something meaningful, something that actually helps people instead of just making money." That evening we sat together making plans. Lucas would use his engineering knowledge to help design a proper studio space. He would also use his business contacts to guide me through the practical side of launching an artistic career at 68 years old. I focused my attention on two things: creating new work and helping organize the group exhibition Diane Holloway, and I had been planning. The Whitmore Gallery agreed to host Recovered, the art of Catherine Bennett, in 6 months. That gave me enough time to create new paintings while also preparing an exhibition of my original work. Catherine Langley had been unexpectedly enthusiastic about the project, perhaps recognizing the publicity value of being connected to a case that had received national attention. "Catherine," she told me during one of our planning meetings, "you've become something of a folk hero in the art world. The artist who exposed a forgery network. People are fascinated by your story." I never wanted to be a folk hero. I only wanted to be an artist. But if the attention helped me rebuild my career and honor the legacies of other artists who had been stolen from, then I could accept being both. That evening I placed my canvas on the easel and began working on a painting I had been thinking about for weeks. This time it wasn't a landscape. It was a portrait. I painted Catherine Holloway from the photograph Diane had shown me, placing her beside her easel with the ocean stretching out behind her. I tried to capture something very specific in her expression, the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew her work was good, even if the world had not yet recognized it. The confidence of an artist who painted for the right reasons. As I worked, I found myself thinking about legacy and recognition, about the difference between simply being seen and truly being valued. Lauren had made my work visible, but she had tried to erase me while doing it. The real victory was not recovering the stolen paintings. The real victory was rediscovering the woman who had created them. At 11 o'clock the phone rang, breaking my concentration. It was Diane Holloway, her voice full of excitement. "Catherine, I just got a call from the Norton Museum," she said. "They want to participate in the group exhibition. They're offering their main gallery with full museum support. A major museum exhibition, for artists who had once been told their work was not important enough to preserve." "Diane, that's incredible," I said. "There's more," she continued. "The FBI investigation has now identified 43 artists whose work was stolen by this network. 43 families who believed their loved ones' legacies had disappeared forever." I thought about Catherine Holloway's unfinished seascape, still resting on her easel like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. I thought about my own paintings that had been rescued from Lauren's fraud and returned to my name. And I thought about artists whose greatest recognition came only after someone tried to steal their contributions to the world. "Diane," I said slowly, "we're not just organizing an exhibition. What are we building then?" she asked. "A monument," I replied. "A monument to the idea that no artist's work should ever be forgotten. and no thief should ever be allowed to steal someone else's vision of beauty. After the call ended, I returned to my painting of Catherine Holloway. And for the first time I realized how much my life had changed. 3 months earlier I had been Catherine Whitaker, an invisible widow serving champagne to people living the life she once dreamed about. Now I was Catherine Bennett again. An artist. An advocate. A woman painting portraits of other women whose stories refused to disappear. And tomorrow I would wake up and continue the work of making sure the world never forgot the difference between the two. 6 months later I stood inside the main gallery of the Norton Museum, watching visitors study my portrait of Catherine Holloway with the kind of attention I had dreamed about my entire life. The exhibition Stolen Voices, Recovered Art and Reclaimed Legacies had drawn crowds from across the country. What began as a story about art theft had transformed into a celebration of artistic perseverance. But the real victory was not the crowds or the glowing reviews. The real victory was Diane Holloway standing beside her mother's recovered seascapes, telling visitors about Catherine's 40-year career painting the same stretch of coastline. She never wanted fame, Diane explained to a young art student. She just wanted to paint what she saw honestly and beautifully. Fame was something other people worried about. The exhibition displayed work from 38 of the 43 artists, whose legacies had been stolen by Lauren's network. 5 families chose not to participate, preferring to keep their recovered pieces private. I respected that choice even though I had made a different one. Agent Navarro eventually found me standing in front of my Miller's Creek landscape, the painting that had started everything when Lauren sold it for $330,000. Tonight the painting hung proudly with my original signature restored, accompanied by a detailed placard explaining its journey from creation to theft and finally to recovery. Mrs. Whitaker. Mrs. Whitaker, Agent Navarro said quietly, I wanted you to know that Lauren was sentenced this morning. 8 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. The news brought surprisingly little satisfaction. Lauren's punishment would not undo the damage she had caused, and her cooperation had been essential in recovering hundreds of stolen artworks. What about the others? I asked. The people who recruited her? Most of them are facing much longer sentences, Navarro replied. The organizer, a man named Adrian Cole, received 25 years. He had been running the operation since 2008, stealing from artists, estates, and insurance collections across 15 states. 25 years seemed fitting for someone who had made a career out of erasing other people's legacies. Cole would spend the rest of his productive life in prison, while the artists he had robbed would finally receive the recognition they deserved. Lucas joined us a moment later, looking proud in the way parents do when their children achieve something extraordinary. Mom, the reviewer from the Times wants to interview you about the new paintings you created for this exhibition. During the previous 6 months I had been painting constantly, rediscovering techniques I once knew and developing new ways to approach subjects that had fascinated me for decades. The 12 new paintings displayed in tonight's exhibition represented the most sustained creative period of my life. Work that belonged entirely to me, untouched by theft or doubt. Lucas, I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of attention, I admitted. Mom, he said gently, you've become one of the most recognized landscape artists in the country. The Whitney wants to acquire 3 of your paintings for their permanent collection. The Whitney Museum. I thought about the 22-year-old Ellie Bennett just out of art school, dreaming about exactly that kind of recognition. She would have been both thrilled and terrified by a night like this. At 68, I felt mostly grateful. Dr. Diane Harper joined us, holding a champagne flute and wearing the satisfied expression of a teacher whose faith in a student had finally been proven right. Catherine, she said, I have news I think you'll appreciate. The community college plans to establish the Catherine Bennett Scholarship for non-traditional art students, people returning to their artistic lives after raising families or taking different paths. Diane, I can't have a scholarship named after me, I protested. I'm still figuring out how to be an artist again. That's exactly why it should be named after you, she replied. You are proof that it's never too late to reclaim your creative life. As the evening continued, I found myself thinking about identity and reinvention, about the difference between who we truly are and who the world expects us to be. For 8 years after Charles died, I had quietly accepted the role of grieving widow, someone whose productive life was finished. Lauren's theft had accidentally revealed that my productive life had never ended. It had simply been paused. Catherine Langley from the Whitmore Gallery approached as I stood studying my newest painting, a self-portrait titled Artist at Work, showing myself painting in my small apartment studio. "Catherine," she said, "I hope you'll consider a solo exhibition with us next year. Based on tonight's response, I believe you could easily fill our main gallery." A solo exhibition at the Whitmore Gallery, the same place where this entire journey had begun when I watched Lauren sell my stolen painting. The symmetry felt almost impossible. "Catherine, I'll need time to create enough new work for a full exhibition," I said. "Take all the time you need," she replied. "Good art can't be rushed." As the reception slowly ended and guests began leaving, I walked through the exhibition one final time. 43 artists were represented. Hundreds of visitors had come to see work that had once been believed lost forever. Stories of survival and recovery surrounded every wall, art that had outlived the people who tried to steal it. In the center of the gallery, a video installation played interviews with families describing the recovered pieces. Diane Holloway spoke about her mother's 40-year dedication to painting the same stretch of coastline, discovering something new in the familiar light every day. An elderly man named Charles Vega talked about his father's abstract paintings from the 1960s, works once dismissed as meaningless when they were stolen, but recognized as significant by the time they were recovered. Each story was different, but they shared the same themes: persistence, dedication to artistic vision, and the belief that creating beauty was always a life well spent. As I listened to those voices, I realized that Lauren had unintentionally given me something more valuable than the money she had made selling my paintings. She had forced me to defend my identity as an artist, to prove that Catherine Bennett had always been worth fighting for. Lucas found me standing in front of Catherine Holloway's unfinished seascape. Diane had loaned it to the exhibition as a symbol of creative work interrupted but never truly ended. "Mom," he asked gently, "are you ready to go home?" I looked around the gallery one last time, seeing my paintings displayed beside the work of artists whose names were finally known because someone had tried to erase them. "Yes," I said, linking my arm through his. "I'm ready to go home and paint." Because tomorrow morning I would wake up in my studio apartment and continue the work I had started 46 years earlier when I first picked up a brush and decided that the world was beautiful enough to deserve careful attention. And this time no one would ever be able to take that away from me. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you have a story of your own, share it in the comments below. Your voice matters.